Good afternoon, everybody. How are you? Um, we're going to start if Rachel could share her screen with the presentation. All right. Thank you. I'm not used to doing webinars, so this is kind of new to me, so thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Like I said, you're part of the presentation for the Boone Impact Group Common Outcomes Overview, and this is something that the big group has been working on quite a while and has been interrupted by the pandemic. So we welcome you today. Next slide. So we're asking that everybody put your name and the organization you're affiliated with in the chat box. We ask that you please keep your audio on mute. And lastly, you may submit your questions in the chat and these will be answered at the end of the presentation if there's any questions. So thank you. I thought what I'd do next is introduce the people that have worked so hard on this, putting this information together. We've got, from my department, the Community Services Department, we've got myself. We have Kristen Cummins, the Program Manager. We have Megan Corbin-Banya, the Data and Performance Analyst. We have DeAndre Thompson, the Program Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Specialist. From the Columbia Boone County Department of Public Health and Human Services, we have Steve Hollis, the Human Services Manager. And from Heart of Missouri United Way, we have Andrew Graybrow, the Executive Director, Courtney Davis, the Assistant Director of Community Impact, and Courtney Delcow, the Community Impact Director. So this is who your panelists are going to be today. And hopefully as we move through this, we'll be able to answer all your questions. Thanks.
Okay, we just wanted to provide a little bit of background before we dive into the presentation about the common outcomes. And I see folks are entering their name and organization. Thank you for doing that. Quick background, I think most of you guys are probably familiar with the Boone Impact Group or BIG. That is a unique partnership between the city, our department, the county, the Community Services Department, the United Way. And I think I can share that recently the Veterans United Foundation and the Community Foundation of Central Missouri, based on our work in Como Helps, are going to be joining us as Boone Impact Group partners. The purpose of BIG was from the beginning to better align our efforts in order to avoid duplication of efforts, to create efficiencies, and really, just as importantly, if not more importantly, to help us tell a common story about the work that we do and about the work that the organizations that we fund and contract do in the community. And that really speaks to many of the projects that we've worked on. These common outcomes are in some ways the last piece of what, it's hard to believe, but it's really been kind of a 5 to 10 year effort to put some things in place to create efficiencies and really help us tell a story to the community and to our stakeholders and to help our partners do that. So that started with, many of you are very familiar with, the city started with an online funding management system. We then moved to Apricot and began to share that with United Way in the county. And so one of the first pieces of the puzzle was to have a common funding system and common proposal forms and reports. One of the next steps was to create a taxonomy of services so that we're all using the same language about services. The other thing we've been working on, this is actually a project that predates BIG, is the Boone Indicators Dashboard, but we've worked to improve the dashboard and try to align that with BIG's efforts by outlining community data, indicators, and now goals. That is ongoing. We have set, as many of you know, some community goals in Boone Indicators. Our next step there will be working on targets. And that that leads us to these common outcomes, because the work that organizations do as our partners is attributable directly to those community outcomes. And to help us tell a story about how those outcomes that you're affecting impact those indicators and goals at the community level is a key part. But to do that, we've got to use some common language. And that's a quick history leading up to these common outcomes. So much like the taxonomy, this is all meant to create a system where we're using the same language so that we can tell a common story about the work we're doing in health, human services, and housing. Next slide, please. This probably looks familiar to any of the organizations that applied for City, County, United Way funding over the past, gosh, 20 or 30 years, actually. This is a pretty basic logic model that most folks are familiar with. What we've highlighted in red are the outcomes, and that's the change that we seek in individuals or populations from the services that are being provided. And to the left there, you see services. So we built a taxonomy around the services and the outputs. So we've come up with common names, definitions, and unit measures. And as much as possible, we try to align costs. And now we're on to the outcomes, which is what we're going to discuss today. I'm going to go to the next slide, I think. So much of this I've covered in the background, but again, the really simple purpose is to align all of our work and really help us create some efficiencies for those that have applied for City, County, United Way funding. You probably know we wind up over the years spending quite a bit of time negotiating outcomes. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes too, because we're actually trying to informally align those across programs. And for the sake of efficiency, and that's efficiency for both us and the providers, we think that choosing from a common set of outcomes is really going to make that process more efficient for all of us. So, and then again, it will make it so much easier for us to create reports, whether they're by funder or across funders, to talk about the services we're buying and the outcomes that they're trying to affect, and then how those speak to those community level outcomes, goals, and indicators. And we really feel strongly this is a key last part of the puzzle for our Boone Impact Group work to really use that collective impact approach to the work we're doing. And I think I'll wrap with that and turning it over to Megan.
Thank you, Steve. I think we're all really excited to have a common way to talk about all the work that's being done in the community across all local funding streams. But to give a little bit of background of where these outcomes have come from, we thought it might be helpful to work through the process that we work through ourselves. So what we did was started with a comprehensive review of all the contracted outcomes that had been utilized in the past by any big funded program. And so that includes the Boone County Community Services Department, the City of Columbia Department of Public Health and Human Services, and Heart of Missouri United Way outcomes. So with the different funding cycles, we were able to look at, Community Health Fund along with Children's Services Fund, different impact areas of United Way funding, and different areas of city funding. Next, once we had a listing of potential outcomes, we looked at other communities to see how they have done common outcomes, or how local funding, local funders within Missouri and outside of Missouri have come up with processes to have a common language across funders. From there, that created our first initial outcome listing. Those of you who have any contracts with the Boone County Community Services Department know that we attempted to use these initial outcomes during the 2019 open RFP. And then with the hope of in 2020 to be able to work through together with all the big partners to have one comprehensive list of outcomes. As everyone is incredibly aware, we had a pandemic that really slowed that effort. So starting in 2021, we picked this work up pretty early, and big partners have now narrowed the selection of common outcomes to what you will see today. And we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So instead of showing you each of the sections of the common outcomes, we wanted to just provide an example, and then we will talk about how you can access the full listing of common outcomes and the feedback process about these later on in the presentation. So today, I just wanted to show you one example of a section of the outcomes. You'll also notice that there's a health and medical section on the left-hand side of this table that matches up with the taxonomy of services. We have tried to make it easy for all of us to understand and kind of conceptualize how these different outcomes might be used across different services. And since we already had a taxonomy of services, it really just made a lot of sense to us to try and group outcomes across these different taxonomy areas. So you'll see that the common outcomes are a little broad. So things from developing and maintaining a healthy lifestyle to successfully able to manage mental and behavioral health, all the way to identifying, managing, and appropriately managing emotions and behaviors are all captured under the health and medical outcome area. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more information about the structure. Common outcomes will typically be utilized for the specific services. So individual therapy for children, case management, or trainings will have the same outcome used across them. And occasionally some outcomes can cross over different outcome or taxonomy areas. So we are aware that that may happen, and you'll see that in the full listing as well. Next slide, please. So we wanted to walk through a couple of examples of how these common outcomes can really work in the and how you're thinking about the work that your organization and your program does. So we're going to look at one example of a case management outcome. So the common outcome could be develop and or make progress toward goals to address identified needs. Goodness. Within this outcome, we have an indicator that is going to show us how we know that you've actually met the success of that outcome and that behavior change has been approved or has been achieved. So here within the indicators, you're going to be able to have a lot more specificity specific to your program. So for this program, 85% of individuals make progress in at least one area of their treatment plan, and then measuring that through case management, planning and notes, and perhaps any discharge notes. Maybe another program does case management with parents. And so that's reflected in the second row of this table of 90% of individuals complete at least one goal on their parent plan. So the indicator is where you can really get more specific with your programmatic context. And then, your method of measurement would line up with, the parent plan and notes. Next slide, please. And then we thought we would look at individual therapy adult. So there's two of the same outcomes, but again, this shows how these can be used specifically within your organization context. So 90% of individuals improve depression scores following intervention. And then you can, use initial and discharge behavioral health assessment scores from a PHQ-9. But this could also be used for someone with any behavioral health concerns, like substance use. So 85% of individuals maintain their sobriety 3 months following discharge, and then how you would measure that. So this is just an example of how these common outcomes will have more broad language so that the different kinds of indicators could be met underneath each of these. And then I think that will allow me to hand this on over to Rachel to talk through the process for feedback.
Okay, thank you so much, Megan. Courtney and I will tag team this so I don't have to talk too much and you don't have to hear too much of me. But as you can see right now, we're in that first little grouping where it says survey. And specifically, we're in that first line, big partners provide an overview of the common outcomes. So that's where we're at now. And we want to go on a journey of collecting feedback from all of our partners who are going to be affected by these changes and make sure that we have an understanding of how this is truly aligning with your work, where it's not aligning, where it looks like it'll work, where it looks like there could be some challenges. And so our initial feedback, we'll collect that through a survey, and we'll provide the link shortly. But we just want to collect all of that feedback by May 12th. And then we will, on the back end, go through and synthesize that data and see what we learn from it. And then we will kind of group our findings and the questions by the taxonomy areas to help us understand where we need to really focus our follow-up. Courtney, I'll let you take it from here.
And then from there, we'll, schedule meetings focused on what those taxonomy areas are, and folks who have the most interest in having those questions answered would be invited to, attend. It will go out and you can attend those meetings. And then we'll again, collect feedback from those organizations and review those outcomes and that are reviewing those outcomes, sorry about that, and then, receive that feedback from them, and then we'll move forward with the next step, of the process in coming back together as big, reviewing those proposed changes from the feedback, and we'll make those needed changes, and then we will publish those on the big website, and we will share that with organizations so that you will be able to utilize that information moving forward when it's time to apply for funding from any of the funders, which is coming up for several of us. And this is just simple. I know you can all read it too, but as I'm talking, Rachel's going to paste these links into the chat. So you're welcome to copy and paste them, save them, whatever you want to do. But the information about the common outcomes is going to be located on the big website. Please make sure to review the full listing of the outcomes and reflect on how they might reflect the work of your organization prior to completing the survey. Also, how they might not reflect the work of your organization prior to completing the survey. Because again, just a reminder, we're using this survey to inform us how to make updates and improvements on the common outcome work that we've already done. And we know that that's not complete. We know that that's an ongoing process. And so we want to make sure to always include all of you in that as much as possible, but we are going to have to get to a point where it's complete for use in the next couple of weeks. So please make sure that that May 12th date is on your brain and that you get that survey back to us by then. And then that last bullet, again, Rachel will paste that into the chat, is where you can access the survey, but the information will also be sent to registrants post-meeting webinar, whatever we're calling it today. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so the next step, once we finalize the common outcomes, we'll need to start incorporating the outcomes in our proposal forms, agreement form, and report forms. And we'll really be kind of looking at the structure of how programs are reporting on the different performance measures. So typically, if you remember, we have organizations report on performance measures by service. We're hoping to be able to consolidate all the performance measures into one table by using the common outcomes. And by doing that, we'll really have to restructure our proposal forms, the agreement form, and the report form. So that's kind of the thing that you'll need to be looking out for here moving forward. We have a few of the big partners that are going to be releasing RFPs over the summer. We hope to be able to incorporate this change into the proposal form, starting off kind of the first step. So I think the next slide is opening up for questions. Joanne, do you want to? Did you notice any questions in the chat that we need to address? Joanne, you're muted.
Sorry, this is my life story. One of the questions that came in was from a question about whether or not they would prefer an organization to turn in a response, or if they would prefer just individual responses. So what is the group's thought on that?
I can take a stab at that for us. I think whichever you prefer. I think ideally we have one response from each organization. However, if there are different people with different skill expertise across different programs, it might make sense for a couple responses, but ideally you could consolidate those into one response for your agency.
Okay. Another question came in and said, do you want only current partners to complete the survey or prospective partners as well? Megan, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we would welcome anyone to complete the survey who might prospectively apply. We want to make sure that this could work, these outcomes could work for folks who maybe aren't yet funded but may want to be funded as well.
I would just add to that, you might take a look at that taxonomy of services first that's on the Boone Impact Group's website, because you're going to want to make sure you're maybe providing services that are included in the taxonomy. So, we have a variety of nonprofits in Columbia and Boone County, and if it's let's say a youth sport, I'm on the board of a youth sports nonprofit. Probably wouldn't be really useful for us to provide feedback, because we don't provide a health human service or housing service. So I would just say with that caveat, we are very open to input from non-funded and contracted entities, as long as you're providing services in the health, human services, and housing arena.
Okay. We have another question. How will an organization handle a proposal where they do sub-activities like feeding healthy meals as part of their work, but that is listed in another category? Does the taxonomy allow for mixing and matching?
I'll grab that one, Joanne. I think for those who've been around for a while, what Kristen's alluding to is going back to our old logic model, where we use one logic model for the program. And actually, part of the reason that we're doing that is that you can list multiple services for an outcome. So for those who've applied recently, one of the issues we've had is that folks have to wind up repeating outcomes multiple times, because multiple services are attributable to that outcome. So Janice, I'm not totally sure that answers your question, but I will say the logic model is designed in a way that's more flexible. So you could put anywhere from 1 to 5 services for an outcome.
Okay, I don't see other questions. Anybody have any other questions? I think I would just like to add to what Steve was saying, is that we are trying to do this to streamline activities as well as to help organizations when they turn in proposals. We've heard some of your concerns, and hopefully this will make this a little less tedious, but there will be a learning curve to this. Any more questions? All right. Oh, I believe. Okay. Yes, we'd see the benefit too. It might be a little less work on all of us, including the funders. Okay. With all these changes, will reporting be different too? One report for all funders. Who wants to take that? Steve?
I think we're going to stick with the same forms for both proposals and agreement forms and reports. I think I take Heather's point. I think Heather and I have talked about that. I think there is some desire to just submit one report. So let's say you're funded by the city, county, and United Way for the same program. It's certainly something on our mind. I will tell you, everything's being designed in a way that could lead to that. There are some challenges, particularly with the governmental entities that need, records. Timing is a bit of an issue, but with the change to the United Way RFP schedule, that was a step in that direction. So I would say that could very well be something that's on the horizon. It's certainly something we've thought about and we will take into consideration. And I do take your point. If it is that, you could just simply turn in one urine report. And I will say that's how it used to be for the City County United Way going way back when. So it is doable. And I think unless someone from Big disagrees, I think it's something that's a possibility.
I agree. I have another question, comment. I understand the streamlining, but will this new format allow for growth or transitioning as the reality of services might change, i.e. COVID or something hits us again? I sure hope not. Any thoughts on that from the panel?
I can offer a response for this one. I think that I guess at least from the county perspective, whenever COVID came, we were really flexible in working with organizations to figure out what works. Given especially since everyone was in shutdown mode. I think that I don't think I can speak for other funders, but I think communicating with organizations that fund you would probably be a good strategy. And I'm not sure that this common outcomes would necessarily speak to like any kinds of changes or transitions. I think as you learn year over year, you could perhaps change some of those contracted outcomes depending on who you're funded with.
The question is, can the outcomes change? Absolutely. I would say it's just like the taxonomy. And when they're on the big site, we will say the same thing. If you have suggestions, concerns, even after these are rolled out, we're always open to feedback. Boone Impact Group actually meets every 2 weeks. So we actually have the opportunity to discuss things like suggested changes or additions to the taxonomy or the common outcomes looking ahead.
And from the United Way perspective, of course, we maintain a commitment to flexibility through crisis and supporting organizations as they adapt to changing needs in the community. And of course, through our year-end reporting process, many of our grants are formative in nature. And so those evaluations that come in are used to address exactly things of this nature. Did we select the right outcomes? Did we select the right indicators and measurements for what we're trying to achieve? Is that really counting what we thought it was counting, or do we need to update that agreement form for the subsequent years to be better reflective of the data we can collect, what the data is showing us, and what we've learned from past data collection?
We had another question come in. It said, will this begin with new RFP or will we add this to existing funding cycles? I think each one of us will have to kind of talk individually about where we're at. Steve, you want to start from the city perspective?
You bet. We definitely plan to include the common outcomes in this next social services RFP that will be released July 19th for basic needs. I think Krista and I are hoping we can get the new proposal forms ready in time. But regardless, we plan to use the common outcomes. So you will be using those if you apply for city social services funding this summer.
Rachel,
for United Way as well, we plan to use them when we open our RFP in mid-July for education. And so you can plan to be using them then as well. As far as past or currently funded in the middle of their 3-year cycle, we haven't gotten that far yet. And so, kind of stay tuned. We will keep you updated if we plan to do something like that to modify any of the past grants and use common outcomes there. But right now we're focusing on the upcoming RFP that will be opening for education in July.
And I would just add, if we do that, it will be through the strategic investment agreement meetings that we have with all of that reporting. So it won't be something that is changing an agreement you already have in place for a funding cycle that you're right in the middle of.
And as far as the county goes, the county did, like we said before, has really tried to make that step towards having those common outcomes. we will be releasing probably a targeted RFP this summer as well, and we will be utilizing this, you know, like Steve is, this new outcome, and hopefully, well, we will. I'm not hopefully. We will have the new apricot system ready to go with that information. I don't see any more questions. Do we have any other questions or comments from anybody? Okay. Any last comments from the group of funders?
Just will share my thanks to everyone for their time. I know how busy everyone is, and we try to keep this tight and give you an opportunity to be reflective and provide some feedback in a direct way. So really hope everybody will take a look at those and complete the survey, because we really do need to hear from you. I have to say, of all the projects we've done, this one was incredibly challenging. So we truly want to hear what you think, because in the end, it's got to work for you guys, the providers.
So Rachel just uploaded the information again. You should be receiving a link to that to all the registered participants. And as always, I'm sure you could call any one of us on the panel to certainly provide you with any type of questions that, you know, answer to your questions or anything. And we really do appreciate your time this afternoon. All right. Have a great day.